If you've ever looked into getting a greenhouse and you've looked online and thought, oh my gosh, there's so much to look at and there are so many options. Today, I want to walk you through how to choose the right greenhouse for your farm or your garden, not based on marketing hype, but based on how you grow and where you grow. So, when we first started, we had so many questions and spent a lot of time researching, but it seemed like there were just so many rabbit holes that we went down. Oh, this is a great idea. And so I'd watch this person and I would just read and go down this idea. And then I was like, okay, that's it. That's how we're going to go. And then my husband would tell me, oh, I just read about this and we should make sure we have this thing on our greenhouse. And I was like, I didn't know about which one to choose. So anyway, I just think it's overwhelming. So I'm going to talk about it today and see if we can help you find some answers to what you should look for, what would be beneficial to you and what you're doing. It's good to think of a greenhouse as more than just a structure because it's really an entire growing system. And the choices you make at the beginning, like when you first start, actually will affect your plant health, your labor, your energy costs, and even your long-term success. University extension programs and USDA NRCS guidelines, they're consistently emphasizing that greenhouse design should be matched to your purpose, to your climate, and also to your management style. So when those things line up, growing becomes so much easier. And when they don't, unfortunately, the problems do tend to stack up really quickly. Your first step, the first thing you want to do when you're trying to decide what features you need in a greenhouse is to decide your growing goals. It's the most important step in choosing a greenhouse, having a clear understanding on how you plan to use it. A greenhouse for a backyard grower is very different and has very different requirements than one used for farm production or even for income if you're trying to make money from it. You want to ask yourself whether you're growing for personal use. Are you growing because you want to sell to local markets and work in the farmer's market? Do you want to have CSAs and CSA shares? Or do you want wholesale buyers? Do you want to go commercially and go to auction with it? All of those different concepts have different growing needs and different environment needs. And that's not meant to overwhelm you. It's just meant to help you think about, what do you see yourself doing in your greenhouse? What kind of grower do you want to be? Each of those goals affects your size and it affects your layout, and it can affect the structure itself and what accessories make sense for you. Another key question to think about is timing. Are you starting your plants as seedlings? Are you extending your spring and fall season? Are you growing year round? Are you deciding that some people just grow starts and then they sell those? So what kind of time frame are you going to be growing in? Season extension, if you're just going to grow a little bit longer into the fall and the spring, that is a very different infrastructure than a full winter production. So matching your greenhouse design to your production goals reduces stress on the plants and on the grower alike. So it can make things a lot easier if you get in alignment with your goals. I've not experienced a season yet when someone hasn't called me needing something now to save their crop. At some point, someone calls me and says, how fast can you get me a shade cloth? Or is it possible to get a heater to me in 3 days? And that's the kind of thing that, of course, you can't always predict where you're going to end up or where you're going to go. But if you can think about those things a little bit ahead of time, where you see yourself, what your goals are, it's really going to help you plan in advance and help you to not feel rushed or put any pressure and stress on, well, I have this great crop and I don't want it to die. So, Lori, what can you get me like now? And so you don't want that to happen. So the next thing you really want to think about when deciding what kind of greenhouse structure and what accessories you need would be your climate, your wind, and your sun exposure. So climate is one of the most overlooked factors when selecting a greenhouse. Wind, snow, temperature swings, and sunlight are all going to play a major role in the success of your greenhouse and of your crops. If you're in an open rural area, for example, there's not going to be anything to block the wind from hitting your structure. Having a greenhouse that's built from strong materials is going to be a necessity in this location. I sadly know this from experience. When we first started growing, we were in an area that actually still had some wind block, but in an effort to try and save money, we were just starting out. We actually made our very first ones out of PVC. And I see that a lot. We thought we're still covering our crop. That's going to be better, right? And I can say that it was. It was better than not covering my crop at all, but it was better until the first storm, and then it was gone. So even all that work that we had done, and there was still time and effort and still money invested in doing that, it was the wrong structure for what we were trying to do. Another element to consider when designing or when choosing your structure is that your orientation is going to matter. And it's a question I get a lot. You do want to orient your greenhouse to maximize the winter sun, right? So think about where your sun in your area is going to come up and where it's going to actually set, because you want, of course, maximum sun exposure, and make sure that maximum sun exposure is provided for your plants throughout the day. It seems like it's not that big of a deal, but this small consideration can actually significantly improve cold season growing efficiency. Ignoring climate realities is one of the fastest ways to shorten the lifespan of a greenhouse. So I frequently have customers also call, and when they want to order a kit, and they'll ask me about, which one. And they'll say to me, when I tell them, how long do you plan on growing? And what's your climate like? And where do you live? And that kind of thing. What zone are you in? And I always ask what the crop is, etc. And I will usually encounter someone or several people who will say, oh, I don't need to worry about X or Y, heating or cooling or whatever, even though I'm going to grow year round, because let's say they live in a warm climate. And when I say warm, I should say warm, because anymore, it's really hard to predict the weather. And what used to be, it's always warm this time of year in this location, I feel confident in saying is not consistent anymore. So the other day here, it was 70 degrees in the morning, and it actually snowed here in the evening. So just warning that you don't want to bank on, I only have one day that'll be cold and I can just add something, or I only have 1 or 2 days that it gets that hot and I'll deal with that, because it's just not predictable. So you got to take it and think about how long you're going to grow. And if not, are you okay with losing that? That was a tough decision that I've had to make before. It got cold really fast, and it was not when it was supposed to be getting cold. Do you run out and buy heaters? Yes, we did, but it's not the best way to go. It sure would have been better to think about that in advance. If I'm going to go grow into this season, I need to have more. So things to think about with the weather. So another thing you need to consider are things like size, layout, and your workflow. When it comes to size, most growers underestimate how much space they actually need. A greenhouse that feels roomy one day can feel cramped within a season or two. In my 14 years in the greenhouse industry and manufacturing greenhouse kits, I have never once had a customer tell me, oh, I so wish that I had gone smaller. That's something I've never heard. On that note, I don't encourage something larger than you can manage. Um, as a commercial grower, if you want to handle a 24 by 96 building, sure, absolutely. That's what you should do because that's what you're planning for. But if you're growing in your backyard just to have some produce for your family, at 24 by 96 is overkill, and it's just going to be a lot of work and time and maintenance to keep up with that. And a lot of extra expense, unless you're planning on having a lot of excess. You're going to have a lot of extra space. So I think it's kind of funny that the recommendation, if you look up what size kit should I get, because that's a pretty common question. And there are lots of different advisors out there that can tell you, or they can do calculators, family of 4. Nothing can tell you how much your family is going to eat or how much exactly you need for X, Y, or Z. But there are some charts and graphs and calculators that can kind of help you out online, give some good estimates. But what it comes down to, and I think it's kind of funny, the general streamline answer that you find is choose the largest structure that you can reasonably manage and afford. And I just think that's so subjective because everyone's budget is different, everyone's needs are different, and you need to think about, even though you can find some really good advice, what's going to be manageable for you, because that may not be what's manageable for somebody else. And sometimes you have to consider what your goals are for growing and your time management. And so that's something I always talk to customers about, and that's thinking about, I have this much time to spend outside of maybe you have another job. Well, again, maybe you don't want a greenhouse that's quite as big. Maybe start a little bit smaller so you can manage it. That being said, it is real that additional space, if you do go larger than what you're thinking, it's going to improve temperature, stability, and workflow. But it can also be more than you were looking to do or invest, because of course, the bigger it is, the more expensive it can be. So I would recommend a very different size for someone who has 2 people and they just want to grow in their backyard than I would a commercial farm. And that's something that has to be considered. My experience personally, smaller and better any day over larger and just more space. My experience personally, and what I always recommend, is smaller and a better, more complete setup. I would recommend that over larger and not quite as complete. Struggling with size, if you don't know and you're just like, this is too much, I can't figure this out, you can always call us or email us, and we're happy to advise and help with that, because again, I remember that struggle and it can be a lot. So feel free to call and I'm happy to advise if I can on that, okay? Layout, also, we do want to mention that layout matters as much as the size does. So think about your full setup and what you want, because that can help determine your size. So if you're thinking, I want to have walkways, I want to have raised beds, I want to have benches. Some people want to have a place to sit down and enjoy their garden. All of these things take up space, and they're not space for plants. And that is something that is really missed a lot. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to grow X amount of produce. And that is a certain amount of square feet. But then when you add in, I want to have benches, and I want to have a walkway, and I want to have a area to work on planting my stuff. I want to have a workbench. I want to have a sink. All of those things are taking away from that space that you were talking about for growing. So again, when you're talking about what size to get, or you're calling someone to ask, think about what kind of full setup you want, because once it's up and you start putting other things in, you might be surprised how quickly that space goes. So things to consider. A good layout design prior to purchasing your kit or prior to investigating a little bit further, to maybe talking to someone, is going to reduce your labor, and it's going to make your daily tasks more efficient. it's also going to help you with not having to necessarily change as quickly in the future. Many of us who have greenhouses and love them have found ourselves wanting to get another one, wanting to add on, wishing we'd gone bigger. So you might want to just, again, think about it in beforehand, because sometimes it's worth going a little bit bigger to get extra things in there or to grow into, no pun intended. So let's talk about another important element to consider when you're trying to decide which greenhouse is right for you. So the components of structure, framing, and the materials that are actually used are incredibly important to consider. So the structural components of a greenhouse determine how it performs over time. Your frame strength, your bracing, anchoring, material quality, those are all far more important than your appearance. So what I mean by that, there are a lot of really cute greenhouses out there. The first to admit it, you can go on your online sites, Amazon. I saw an adorable greenhouse at Sam's Club the other day. It was super cute. And for the right person in the right scenario, I'm not saying that's bad, could be absolutely ideal. But for me, not only the size, of course, but for me, it wouldn't be adequate because it would blow away so fast. And I do have more stories, unfortunately, than I can share from customers who've called me and said, yeah, I've gone through 3 other small greenhouses. I purchased this one online. I purchased this one. I had a cheap one. I did that and this to save money. And now I'm calling you to get something that's more stable because I don't want to do that anymore. And a lot of times, if you add up the cost of those, I would have much rather invested that in a structure that was going to last than what I spent doing that. So lessons learned. To just inform you further of the value, I guess reiterate the value of thinking about that structure and the materials, the USDA and the NRCS high tunnel grants, their standards emphasize it has to have proper anchoring. It has to have structural integrity. Materials have to be capable of withstanding environmental stress. There are all sorts of requirements that are all about that structure, because if they're going to invest in it, if the government's done the research to invest in it and they're going to invest in you, they want to make sure it's going to last. So one of the largest recommendations are galvanized steel frames. They are widely recommended because they offer a durability and a resistance to corrosion. They're not going to rust on you, which is nice. Especially in farm environments. Of course, you're dealing with a lot of water all the time. There are a lot of elements to encounter. So galvanized steel is something you definitely want to look for. It's not going to rust. It's going to hold up strong in those elements. You also are going to want to think about the material that's being used to cover your greenhouse. Single layer film, double layer insulated. These are different systems that have benefits depending on the climate, depending on your budget, depending on your growing goals and needs. So those are things that should be talked about and thought about more. I will do more information on the different types of films and different types of setup with film, 2 layers versus 1 layer, that kind of thing, on a different video. But for this one, I just want you to consider that. And it's a good question to ask when you're deciding which kit to purchase. So ultimately, you want to make sure that you're choosing materials that are going to be based on long-term performance rather than short-term costs. It'll pay off in the end. It really will. And I know that sometimes it can seem like a larger investment, but again, my experience has been it's worth making that investment to make sure the materials are solid and that you've got all the right equipment that you need so that you can be successful versus having a greenhouse that doesn't serve you the way it needs to for your goals. I know it can be tempting to cut corners, and I absolutely understand having to be budget friendly and concerned about budget. That's important, of course. But as I mentioned before, getting something stronger and using galvanized steel. So let's talk about another element that should be considered when deciding which greenhouse makes sense for you. And that is the category of ventilation, heat, and your environmental control. So ventilation is one of the most critical aspects of greenhouse success. Poor airflow is going to lead to overheating and humidity buildup, and that leads to increased disease. Many of us feel like figuring out how to ventilate the greenhouse can be overwhelming. And we also typically think it's going to be incredibly expensive. Most of us, I did, thought only of these giant fans and louvers and thermostats and all the things, which are great, absolutely. But it's important to note that there are other options that can accommodate different budgets and different levels. So you can go for the ease, which is thermostats, but perhaps that's more expensive and not where you're at right now. You don't have to. You can go more simply, and you can do something like roll up sidewalls. And that can do a lot for you, especially depending on your climate and what your goals are. And then there's maybe not quite as easy because there's not a thermostat on it. But on the other hand, also not quite as expensive. So it's important to think about that. What's going to work for you and for your greenhouse. And then there are heating needs to consider. They depend on how early or late you want to grow. And of course, temperatures in your area. Season extension typically requires minimal heat compared to year-round growing. I have some customers in Colorado, for example, and they grow year-round, and they actually utilize ground cover and cold weather crop in their high tunnels, and they don't add heat at all. And again, they grow year-round. So it depends how you're doing things that can make all the difference. They didn't want to do heaters and add all the electricity and things, so they just don't. If it gets really cold, they will add frost cloth on a night that's going to get really cold. But because they have their ground cover and a cold weather crop, it works for them not to add heat. And of course, that's going to change if you're growing a different crop that needs more heat, or if you're growing in a different manner. So just an example of how you can actually still do some of the things you may want to do and not realize without the same level of expense. There are also additional accessories that you can consider, and some people get them right away, some never get them, and some get them as they go. And you can decide that as well. There are things like shade cloth, ground cover, circulation fans, as I mentioned, exhaust fans, maybe heating systems. There's all sorts of things, irrigation systems. It's important to think about, again, what you're wanting to do and what you're able to do. Some people like to add one element at a time and learn how that worked, how it helped, make it a little bit easier. Others decide that they're going to do it all at one time and get started. And it just depends. Again, of course, it's always an investment, but each investment I have found might make it a little bit easier. So whether or not that's worth it to you, it's going to depend on your lifestyle and what your goals are. So, of course, another consideration that really needs to be addressed are budgets. And that includes thinking about grants and your long-term value. Budget always matters, of course. We all know that. But the cheapest option, as I was saying, is not always the most economical long-term choice. So again, you have to consider it as an investment. Durability, repairability, labor efficiency, and replacement part availability. These are all things that should be factored into your decision. There are grants available oftentimes to help you. The USDA offers a lot of, I mentioned before, many grants that can help you get started. We've worked with a lot of these grants, a lot of customers with these grants, and it's really helped people get started without having to come up with quite as many funds up front. And there's a whole other video and many other videos probably on the NRCS grant or the USDA. But for this video, just want to mention that if you are wanting to get started, and budget, of course, common challenge, then maybe look into some of these grants because it's amazing what they can help you accomplish. For many people, it's a good idea to invest in your structural quality first As I was saying, even if you have to just get that frame because that's where you are budget-wise and you can get started, and then invest in those accessories over time. When we started, once we got over the PVC debacle, we built our frame, galvanized steel, and then it seemed that every season we would add an element. We would add a different accessory, and they would always make our lives a little bit easier. So when we started, perhaps we only had roll-up sidewalls. And so one of the things about that is you have to be there. So when it gets really hot, someone needs to be there to roll up those sidewalls so the air can go through. So it was wonderful that it let the heat out and we didn't have to pay for electricity for that. Awesome. But you had to make sure someone was there, right? So if you're someone who is around on your farm, it's wonderful. But if you're someone who might be gone, then maybe the next accessory for you, and one that makes the most sense, would be getting ventilation fans and an exhaust system with a thermostat. So if you're not there, it just kicks on. So again, you have to think about how you're starting off and what you can invest in your system. The more accessories you have, of course, the easier it is. Our system, you can actually see on our website and our different kits are pretty much every season when we added more things. And so we build it so you can add it on, or you can start with, we have an all-inclusive kit, and that's all the things, like starting off with the appropriate heat and cooling and shade cloth and ground cover. So if you don't want to think about it, you can get that kind of kit. So just want to say that, like, you need to make sure that what are you up for? How much do you want to do? How much do you want to think about? How much do you want to be automated? So ultimately, choosing the right greenhouse is going to start with understanding your particular goals and thinking about your climate and then how you plan to grow over time. Is it a family crop? Are you starting a business? Do you want it to grow into a business? Maybe you start it smaller and then it grows into something else. When the structure matches the job, the plants are going to be healthier, the management is going to be easier, and the greenhouse is going to become an actual asset for you. Taking the time to make the right decision up front and thinking about these different aspects is going to set you up for long-term success. And that's going to be so much better than not thinking about it early on. So if you found this information valuable or helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel. We share practical, real-world greenhouse guidance like this regularly, and subscribing helps us make sure that you don't miss any videos.